11th, 1953. Waco, Texas. 114 dead. Nearly 600 injured. Downtown torn open in 8 minutes. The government called it an F5 after the fact. We called it the day the air came apart. I was one of the ones who lived. I was 30 years old. Salesman at R.T. Dennis & Company, the furniture store on Austin Avenue. We sold beds, sofas, and dining sets to half the town. On clear days, you could see the Amicable building, the Alico, rising above us, a 22-story anchor against the flat horizon. It was a Tuesday. We had the radio on low in the stockroom. The Weather Bureau had said severe thunderstorms. No sirens, no television bulletins, just heavy air and people's knees hurting. At 4:36 p.m., the windows across our showroom turned white. Not from light, from pulverized glass hanging in the air after the first panes blew. The noise hit next, a roar so deep it set my teeth on edge. The front doors slammed inward. Our floor manager, Frank Dillard, shouted for us to get away from the front. He never finished the sentence. A panel of plate glass snapped like ice. For 8 minutes, the core of town was inside a machine. Cars stacked along Austin Avenue like toys, brick walls that had stood 3 generations unzipped at the corners. A bus lifted onto its side. The Aliso lost windows and stood like a lighthouse. Our building didn't stand. The official count came later. 30-plus souls crushed in our store alone. People under beams and bricks. People who had come to buy a chair. The city set up triage in churches and schools. The National Guard rolled in from the armory. Ambulances ran until the tanks were dry. What matters for a story like this is the exactness. Time, place, sequence. I've told it the same way for years. Where I was standing, what I heard, who I saw in the last seconds before the ceiling dropped. You can count off 8 minutes on a wall clock and think it's short. It is long enough to mark the rest of your life. At 4:30, I was in the office, checking delivery slips. At 4:34, I was on the stairs from the mezzanine, coming back to the showroom. At 4:35, the air went still in a way that made the hair on my arm stand up. Then a grind in the bones of the building, then the sound that drowned everything else. I remember the woman in the blue hat who came in at 4:15 to look at dining chairs. She touched the back of each one like she was testing for something I couldn't name. She left without buying. I remember Frank adjusting his tie when the first thunder rolled. He always did that when weather came. A nervous habit from his army days. I remember the smell of the floor wax we used on Tuesdays, sweet and sharp, mixing with the ozone smell that comes before a big storm. The building had been solid. 3 stories of brick and timber, built in 1923 when they made things to last. The foundation went deep. The walls were thick. We trusted it the way you trust the ground under your feet. We had weathered storms before. Hail that cracked windshields, wind that bent the street signs, rain that flooded the basement stockroom, but nothing that made the building itself seem temporary. At 4:35, the pressure changed. You felt it in your ears first, then in your chest, like being underwater. The fluorescent lights flickered once, twice, then steadied. The radio in the stockroom went to static. Frank walked to the front windows and looked south down Austin. I could see his reflection in the glass, his forehead creased, his mouth set in a line. He turned back to us and opened his mouth to say something. That's when the first window blew. The sound came in layers. First the wind, high and constant like a siren that wouldn't quit. Then the impact sounds. Metal on brick, wood splitting, glass breaking in sheets and falling like rain. Under it all was something deeper, a grinding, tearing noise that seemed to come from the earth itself. The building began to sway. Not violent at first, just enough to make the light fixtures swing and the floor creak under our feet. I grabbed the stair rail and felt the wood vibrate under my palm. The mezzanine office where I kept my desk started to pull away from the main structure. I could see daylight through a crack that opened between the wall and the ceiling. Daylight that shouldn't have been there. Daylight that meant the roof was coming apart. The showroom floor was chaos. Customers pressed against the back wall. A child cried in his mother's arms. An old man sat in one of our display recliners, gripping the armrests like he was riding out rough water. The front doors had blown open and the wind was driving rain and debris straight through the store. Papers from the office flew in circles. A lampshade rolled across the floor like a tumbleweed. I made it to the bottom of the stairs just as the front wall gave way. The brick didn't crumble. It peeled back in sections, like someone was opening a can with a giant opener. The wind reached in and grabbed everything loose. Chairs lifted and spun. The cash register slid across the counter and crashed to the floor. A sofa tumbled end over end and slammed into the far wall. By 4:44 p.m. it was past us and pushing northeast. It left the center of Waco in a gray rain with wires hissing the pavement, alarm bells ringing, people calling names. My right leg was pinned under a double joist. Dust in my mouth. Blood up my right sleeve. Voices close and far, like a radio drifting in and out. I remember counting my breaths to stay awake and thinking about the last delivery I'd booked for the McLennan farm on Old Lorena Road. I woke at 6 that morning in a room over a barber shop on South 4th. I rented it month to month. The window stuck in summer and rattled in winter. I liked the noise. I could hear the trolley buses start up and the first trucks for the produce market. I shaved with cold water and ate 2 eggs at the counter at Katz's on Austin. Coffee, black. The waitress wrote my order, without asking. That was the rhythm. I walked to work, 2 blocks east to the store. R.T. Dennis & Company had 3 floors, showroom, mezzanine offices, and a warehouse level in the back. The building was brick, heavy, old. The kind you trust without thinking. I started at 8, swept the aisle runners, checked bulbs, polished the glass on the radio console display. We had a spring sale on bedroom sets, American maple, twin and full. Prices hand-lettered on cardstock. Miss Ruth Turner handled the ledgers in the office. She had a pencil behind her ear and a stack of invoices she watched like a hawk. Frank came in at 8:30, hat in hand, tie already loosened. He walked the floor, tapped the arms of a sofa, checked tags, nodded. He was not a man of speeches. He just pointed to what needed doing and kept moving. We had 2 deliveries to schedule. One to Spiegelville after lunch, one to a new ranch house up Bosque Boulevard. The morning was slow. The air was thick early. By 10, the sky had lost its blue. We joked about rain. A woman from Belmead, Mrs. Carter, came in to look at dinettes. Chrome and vinyl were the new thing. She repeated 3 times that her kitchen was small. I showed her a 4-top with a leaf that slid in. We wrote it up for Friday delivery. She put $5 down. Around noon, I stepped out the back door to smoke. The sky to the southwest built up in layers, white towers with dark bellies. You could feel the weight in it. I flicked ash into a coffee can. Earl from the warehouse rolled open the door and looked up. "Spring blow," he said. He had seen storms his whole life. He wiped his hands and went back to his crates. I ate a ham sandwich at my desk. 2 slices of white bread, mustard, the edges drying while I checked the delivery board and called a customer out on LaSalle. The phone line crackled. She confirmed the afternoon window. I penciled it in, rubbed a smudge from the corner with my thumb. The delivery board was my responsibility. Names in neat columns, addresses checked twice, delivery times penciled in margins. Mrs. Henderson on Franklin wanted her bedroom set before 3. The Kellys on Herring Avenue had been waiting since February for their sofa. Supply chains moved slow in 1953. You ordered furniture like you planted trees, expecting to wait. Ruth kept carbon copies of every receipt. She filed them in metal boxes by month and year. The office smelled like carbon paper and floor wax. Customers came back months later with questions. Ruth could find any receipt in under a minute. She knew her system like a preacher knows scripture. By 2, the light in the showroom went flat. The display lamps made everything yellow. Ruth fiddled with the radio. A polka station out of West came through better than the news. She turned it back to Waco AM. The announcer mentioned thunderstorms near McGregor, 50-mile-per-hour gusts, possible hail. No one said tornado. No one ever did unless one had already hit. People still came in. A young mother with a boy who wouldn't let go of a wooden truck in the toy section we kept near the registers. An older man looking for a mattress that wouldn't hurt his hip. He lay on 3 and chose the firmest. $48 cash from a roll in his shirt pocket. That was 2 weeks' rent for me. The toy section was Frank's idea. He said families bought more when children were occupied. We kept wooden trains, dolls, and picture books on a low shelf. The boy that afternoon had dark hair and serious eyes. He moved his truck along an imaginary road, making engine noises under his breath. His mother watched while she examined dining chairs, touching each back like she was testing for something I couldn't name. At 3, the first rain tapped, big drops like nickels on the glass. The streets smelled like hot dust turning to mud. I moved a floor model away from the front in case the windows leaked. Frank had us bring down a stack of cardboard to set under any drip. We were used to that. Old buildings breathed and seeped. You worked around it. The cardboard came from shipping boxes Earl saved in the warehouse. Nothing went to waste. We used it for protecting furniture during delivery, covering leaks, writing temporary signs. Frank had learned to save everything during the Depression. He never forgot those lessons. Waste nothing, he'd say. Use it all twice. At 3:30, the rain got heavy. It sounded like someone pouring nails onto the roof. Hail started. Pea-sized, then bigger. Someone's Buick outside took a few hits with a hollow sound. A woman in a hat paused just inside and said, "Good night." She stood a minute and went on. The hail made customers nervous. They stood at windows watching ice bounce off the sidewalk. A man in overalls said his truck windshield would be spiderwebbed. He seemed more resigned than angry. Weather was part of life in Central Texas. You fixed what broke and moved on. At 4, I was in the stockroom signing for a shipment from a Fort Worth wholesaler. 6 crates, 2 mirrors, 1 radio console. I initialed with the pencil Ruth had given me. The driver wanted to make Temple before dark and hustled the paperwork. He pulled away with the truck box rattling and the rain banging his roof. I closed the dock door and listened to the change in the noise. The wind went down for a beat. That was the part that still catches in my throat when I tell it. The quiet that isn't quiet. The kind where you feel your own pulse in your ears. Frank called from the floor. "Let's keep folks to the back." He said it like a drill. Calm. Move people away from glass. We had done it in thunderstorms before. I scanned the office for the flashlight we kept by the adding machine. It was where it always was. I stepped back onto the mezzanine to look over the rail. The front windows were dark with rain. The streetlights had clicked on. People in the drugstore across the way were pressed 3 deep behind their soda counter. I could see the Alico through the smear of water, a gray block with eyes knocked out by the storm. That was the last ordinary view I had of downtown. The radio sputtered with static, and then a clipped voice from Fort Worth saying there was a severe thunderstorm warning for McLennan County. No mention of rotation, no code words, just severe. Ruth turned it up. We all leaned toward noise like it would tell us what to do. Outside, the rain went from a sheet to strings, like the wind cut it lengthwise. Earl came in from the warehouse with a tie-down strap over his shoulder. "That south door keeps working itself loose," he said. He had to shout to be heard over the hail on the roof. The bulbs flickered once. The clock over the office door ticked and then lost its noise. I looked up out of habit and saw it at 4:34. Frank walked the floor, moving customers by the back wall. He put his hand on people's elbows, guided them past the display of headboards. "Just a blow," he said. "We'll wait it out." He was steady as dry ground. That helped. His voice carried the kind of calm that made people move without questions. The few customers still in the store pressed against the interior walls. Maybe 8 people total. The young mother held her boy close. The older man who had bought the mattress sat in a display chair, hands flat on the armrests. We didn't have a basement shelter that anyone used. The building had a partial lower level under the warehouse, crowded with boxes and scrollwork legs. No one had ever drilled us on storms. We had fire drills once a year. For weather, we relied on common sense. Away from windows, against interior walls. You did what you thought was right. The air stilled in the aisles. The water streaks on the glass front slowed. The hail stopped. That is what drew people to the windows. You see rain all your life. You notice when it dies in the middle of a blow. Frank barked, "Back," before anyone took a step. Not the windows. People obeyed his tone more than his words. I glanced through the door to the alley. The light there had a color I had no name for then, a kind of bad daylight. Over the roofs to the southwest, the clouds didn't look like clouds. They were a dark, low wall with something inside it rolling. I'd seen rope tornadoes in photographs. This wasn't that. This filled an edge of the world. The temperature dropped fast. You could feel it on your skin like stepping into shade. The pressure in my ears built and then popped. Once, then again, harder. A woman's hat blew across the showroom from the coat stand and hit the far wall. That was the first thing that moved inside before anything else did. Then my ears popped again, harder. The pressure found me behind the eyes. My mouth tasted like metal. I said, "Get down," without thinking. I heard my own voice like it came from a corner of the room. We had seconds then. I can count them back. Frank pointing to the back hall. Ruth stuffing the day's till in the bottom drawer. $40 in bills and change. She turned the key with shaking hands. A kid crying once and then holding his breath. Earl grabbing the strap and wrapping it around a stack of mattresses like he could keep them from walking. I put my hand on the stair rail and felt the wood hum. The windows went dull and then went white. It wasn't the glass breaking yet. It was the air on the other side full of something. Dust, rain, I don't know. So thick it turned the world into one color. The first pane cracked in a star and held. The second made a sound like a bottle snapping and fell in. The wind came like a hand inside the room and everything loose became a projectile. Price tags flew like confetti. The wooden truck the boy had been playing with skittered across the floor. A floor lamp toppled and the bulb popped with a bright flash. I was halfway down the stairs. I sat down hard, feet on a lower step, hands on either side of me. That kept me from being thrown. A lampshade spun past and the cord snagged a chair and dragged it. Frank was on his belly, pulling a woman by the arm toward the back. The boy's mother had him under her body against the corner. Ruth ducked behind the office counter and covered her neck with both hands. The front doors tore off. The hardware went with them, the entryway filled with splinters and dust. The air carried the smell of wet plaster and oil, and a sour odor like batteries. The roof started to peel. You could hear it separate from the joists. Nails screamed out of wood. Hail came back, bigger now, hammering the parts of the floor that had sky above it. There was no single moment of, now it hit. It was a progression, a building taking more than it could. The west wall bowed. I saw the brick course bulge and crack. The mezzanine shook left and right like a hung platform. The staircase I sat on stayed bolted to the side wall. I was lucky for that anchor without knowing it. A sound took over that was not the wind. It was lower. It was the building failing. The front third dropped like an elevator going through its cables. The ceiling over the showroom came down in sheets. The man who had tried the mattress took 2 steps and was out of sight under the collapse. I saw the heel of his shoe last. Frank shouted, "Back wall!" And then he disappeared under falling plaster. The corner where the boy and his mother were became a well of dust, and then nothing. I could still see the alcove for a heartbeat through the hole where our windows had been. It stood, a grey rectangle with every window blown, like a giant had put its hand over it and squeezed. Then the sight line was gone because our roof tilted. I dove the last 3 stairs and crawled under the office desk. Ruth was there. Her eyes were wide but focused. "Stay down," she said. Her voice was very calm. We both put our hands up as the first beam came through the wall. The desk took the hit and then caved an inch at a time until it settled on our backs. Not crushing. Heavy. Enough to tell you that any move had to be slow. The last intact frames of wall in front gave way and the showroom became a pit of debris. The mezzanine, where I had been seconds earlier, folded at the midpoint and slammed down like a book closing. I felt the draft change again, and then dust turned the space into a blind room. Ruth coughed, a dry bark, and I did too, which made the dust move more. A joist end punched through the office ceiling 2 feet to my left. Plaster dust hit my neck, warm and gritty. The desk over us shifted and settled. I moved my head to the side and kept my fingertips flat so I wouldn't crush them. Weight came down through the desk, then lessened, then came back, like the building above us was breathing. The sound outside the desk was a continuous thing, the kind of sound that would make you cover your ears if you could. There was a high note in it like a whistle and a low vibration as if a truck idled right against the wall. On top of that were impacts. You knew when a piece of brick fell and when a timber came down. The timbers hit like a sentence ending. Somewhere to our right, a woman cried for help. She repeated it like a metronome. "Help! Help!" It was the same distance and tone each time until it stopped and didn't start again. You learn later that stopping means one of 2 things. I didn't think that yet. Thinking turned narrow. My world went to the space under the desk, the pressure on my back, and the feel of Ruth's arm against mine. "Can you breathe?" Ruth said. I said yes. My mouth tasted like lime. I swallowed grit and it made my stomach rock. I kept breathing slow to calm the urge to cough. The air changed temperature. A burst of cold came with a drawn-in wind, then hot again. Gas smell. I recognized it and pictured a broken line somewhere in the alley. A hiss emphasized the picture. A beam on the left slid and pinned my right calf. Not crushed, pressed enough to make the muscle tremble. I tested my foot. I could move the toes. The pain sparked and settled. I told Ruth I was pinned. She said she couldn't feel her left hand. She wiggled her fingers and found tingling. That was good. We took inventory out loud like we knew how to do it. It gave shape to the minutes. Above us, the rumble began to weaken. It did not stop at once. It thinned, like a train going into distance. The vacuum feeling in my ears let go. My hearing picked up other things. A bell clanging where it lay on the floor, a car horn blaring steady until the battery died. Someone repeating a name, Frank, Frank, then coughing and then quiet. Rain began to tap on whatever was over us. It put a beat to things. Silence after a tornado is not silent. It has layers. After the wind leaves, you hear everything that can still move settle in. Nails adjusting, boards sighing. That silence is the loudest thing because it leaves room for voices. First voices were near. Earl shouted from somewhere I could not see. "Anybody?" He sounded hoarse and raw. I tried to answer. The dust made my voice a thin thing. Ruth tried too. We got one shout each before coughing took it. Then another voice, outside and far. A man calling, "Is anyone alive in RT, Dennis? Call out!" It was impossible for him to hear us. I yelled anyway. I yelled my own name. I yelled Ruth's. Let someone overhear one word and aim for it. That was the idea. The desk had a side panel that had broken when the beam punched through the ceiling. It left a triangle opening near the floor. Daylight didn't come through it. Gray did. Enough glow to show shapes, the edge of the adding machine, the keys covered in dust, the flat black of the ledger binder. I pushed my fingers through the triangle and hit plaster dust. Nothing to grip. I pulled back and coughed again. "Count," Ruth said. "Keep counting." She started at 10 and worked down. We both did. Our numbers met when one of us lost track and the other said the next one. It kept the mind between walls. I tried to listen for the voices outside. They came and went. The line of the storm still moved northeast. You could hear the rumble chase away. Then the drip of water returned. It was heavy, the kind of drip that swells and then falls. It hit something hollow. I checked the beam on my leg again. I pushed with my hands on the floor and made a half-inch. The beam did not shift. I waited for the wave of pain to go and then tried again. No movement. I let it be. I didn't have room to get leverage. Panic is a shape. It starts wide and comes narrow until it is a spot of heat under the ribs. Counting and breathing opened it back up. The first rescuer voice, close enough to hear words, belonged to someone with a smoker's rasp. "We got live ones?" another answered. "I got 3 on the sidewalk that are gone." The rasp came closer, then over us, muffled by layers. "Hold still if you're in there," he said, like we could do anything else. A dog barked once and then yelped. Someone pulled it away. A hand tapped the debris above and to our left. 3 quick knocks. I answered with my knuckles on the desk wood. 3 back, tap code without the code. He knocked again, moved 6 inches, knocked again. He was triangulating us like under snow. "Here," I said. "Office, beneath the desk." Dust caught the end of the sentence. "Hang on," he said. "We gotta get a jack." His sound moved away. The rain thickened. Water began to run in lines down through cracks and drip on the back of my neck. It was warm rain, then cold in the draft. A smell of gasoline drifted in, then the sharper smell of solvent. Later I learned they used gasoline-powered saws on timber and bricks. Fumes stayed low. Under a desk is low. The first tool we heard cut was an axe. It hit in double beats. Chop, chop, then a stop to listen, then chop again. Wood split. Plaster fell in a dry pour. Someone muttered, "Watch that line," and another said, "Cut it." The hiss of gas dulled. The air cleared a notch. I saw the gray get lighter by a degree. Oars wanted it too. We settled into a pattern. Breathe, count, listen, answer taps. The weight above us shifted with every cut they made. The desk creaked like a voice in sleep. Once, a heavy piece slumped and pushed down hard. For a second, I saw light spots. It passed. Ruth said, "Still here," and I said, "Still here," and that turned into a small vow. Voices moved over us. Names passed. "Get Henry. Bring the cribbing. Watch your foot." A man with authority started setting a rhythm. "On me. Lift. Hold. Wedge." The wood blocks went in with a thud and a squeal. Someone cursed when a nail got him. He sucked the air through his teeth and then laughed at himself. The sound steadied me more than anything. People joke when they can still see a path. A rivulet ran along the floor and pooled under my chest. The water made a cold patch that got colder as the breeze found it. The smell of wet gypsum was in it. Mixed with oil, mixed with a faint sweet from a crushed bottle of polish we kept in the desk. Every smell had a source I could picture. That kept my head from going to places that weren't helpful. A woman above us sobbed for a long time. She called George, and then cried steady, and then went hoarse, and then quiet. I learned later her husband was pinned in a car on Austin Avenue. The line of crushed automobiles there ran bumper to bumper for a block. Men lifted one by one to get to the next. It took all night. "Talk to me," I said to Ruth. It was half request, half order. She told me about a joke Earl made that morning about a customer who wanted to return a chair because it looked different in her house. She told it flat, like you tell facts. I laughed once and it hurt the dust in my throat. I told her about the delivery to the McLennan farm and how the dog there always ran ahead of the truck like a scout. Small things that drew a line back to the kind of hour where a clock mattered. A rescuer's hand pushed through the triangle gap, fingers first, then the back of his hand, then wrist bones scraping the broken wood. It touched my knuckles. "Got you," he said. He could only brush the tips. The gap was too narrow. He pulled back. "We're going to lift the beam. Don't move until we say. You move and something else may come down." He and another man laid a small jack somewhere left. The first pump, metal on metal, rang clear. The gear bit. The beam groaned. The weight on my calf eased a hair. Then a crack sounded above and behind, and all hands stopped. "Hold," the lead said. They set wedges. Shadows shifted. The jack ticked again. The weight lifted another notch. Blood came back into my foot in a burn like fire under the nails. I bit the inside of my cheek and tasted iron. "You with me?" the voice asked. "With you," I said. They braced and went again. This time the beam climbed a half-inch and then settled onto the cribbing blocks with a dull sound. "Okay," the man said. "We won't take more. Can you slide your leg?" I tried. The skin stuck to wood. I moved a quarter inch, then half, and then clear. The pain after free was worse for a moment. I pressed my face to my coat sleeve until it dulled to a throb. "Good," he said. "Now the desk." They did not try to lift it all at once. They made a tunnel. Hands came in, pulled away small stuff, then medium. They cut the side panel with a handsaw to widen the triangle. The blade teeth caught and sang. They stopped when the desk groaned. "Not yet. Not yet," the lead said. "We take it a finger at a time." "Name?" he asked in the middle of this, like it was a form. I gave mine. "And you?" Ruth gave hers. He repeated them back. Names put us on a list. Lists hold people in the world. Lights came next, not electric. Hand lamps. The beams came through dust in cones. The color of the dust turned gold. One lamp clicked and went dim. The man cursed at a battery. Another lamp took its place. In the light, I could see Ruth's face streaked where tears had cut the powder. Her mouth was a narrow line. She looked at me and nodded once. Still here. "Where's your breath?" the lead asked. He meant, "Can you breathe?" I said yes. He said, "We're cutting a relief. We don't want a shift." He tapped above us, 3 notes, always before a move. We would tap back if we could. Signal, then action. It told my nerves what to expect. When the gap was big enough to move air but not people, they stopped. "We got gas under here," someone said. "Don't spark." They backed off the powered tools. Back to hand. The work slowed. Time stretched. The dog barked again and then grew quiet. Men shouted for water. Someone passed buckets. You could hear the slosh. A voice to the right asked about the alico, if it was steady. A man answered, "She's fine. Glass gone. She held." The answer carried a tone I recognized. Relief that one thing was still standing. Through the small hole I could not see it. I could see the hem of a coat sleeve and a gloved hand, and the round face of a watch on a rescuer's wrist. The hand hair had plaster dust in it. That detail fixed the scene. "When we tell you, you come to us on your belly," the lead said. "Don't turn. Don't lift your shoulders too fast." The desk took most of the ceiling weight. If we shifted wrong, something else could come down. "One at a time. Who goes first?" "Her," I said. "She's lighter." Also, if something went wrong, I wanted to be the one who had room to push. It wasn't noble. It was survival math. Ruth didn't argue. She set her elbows under her and cheated forward. The opening was still mean. 2 men reached in and took her wrists. They eased her out, and then she was gone from my sight, and voices were saying her name in a different tone. Pleased, surprised, like a cheer whispered. They came back for me. The opening looked small from my angle. It felt smaller when I put my hands through. The desk gave as I shifted, and my breath went shallow without permission. The lead saw it and said, "Small breaths, steady," and he tapped the desk again. 3 knocks, like he had to remind it we were in conversation. Hands took my wrists. The tug was firm. I slid until my shoulders stuck at the corners, then angled, then cleared. My chest came free last, and the weight lifted from my back. I took air that hurt like cold and smelled like smoke and wet wood and skin. They dragged me onto a plank they had laid on broken glass and bricks. I lay there on my side, and the world widened into more sound and more light and more faces. Ruth was sitting, hair matted with dust, a blanket around her shoulders. Her left hand shook big, uncontrolled shakes. A fireman held it in both his hands and breathed with her once, twice. A medic looked at my leg and said, "Not broken," like a decision. He wrapped it tight with a bandage and pinned it with a safety pin. He pressed my ribs. I yelled. He nodded. "Bruised. Maybe cracked. You'll feel it tomorrow," he said. He moved his hand slow over my scalp and found a line of blood from a cut. The sting flared when he touched it. He wiped grit out with a wet cloth. It felt like being skinned. They moved us to the sidewalk where a line of stretchers had formed. Austin Avenue was a stripe of steel and glass and brick with spaces where buildings had been. Cars were bent over each other, windshields gone, wheels up like spurs. The rain came and went in sheets. Wires touched the wet pavement and kicked light. Men in city utility trucks threw sand and put up sawhorses where the line snaked. The Alico Tower was a gray slab above everything, every window blown, curtains torn and hanging out like flags. Men inside it waved flashlights out at the street. Someone said the building was the command post now. The insurance men had phones. Phone lines worked not at all, then a little, then not at all. Runners carried messages. We shared a wool blanket that left fuzz in my mouth when I coughed. A minister from First Methodist moved down the line of the living with a canteen and a quiet word. He did not ask if you wanted prayer. He set a hand on a shoulder and stood a minute and moved on. A teenage boy brought a bucket of water and a stack of Dixie cups. He shook so bad the water slopped, and he kept saying sorry. No one minded. An ambulance from a funeral home, most served double duty then, backed in crooked with the rear doors open. They loaded 3 people and went. A pickup pulled up with its bed already full of folks laid flat with coats over them. Some moaned, some didn't. A volunteer stood at the corner with a clipboard and scratched names, misheard names, made marks when he had none. "We got a Ruth Turner," he said when he reached us. "We got a, spell it?" He wrote my name with an E when there isn't one. That is how it is in the first hour. Firefighters from Waco, men from the Air Force base up at Connolly, Baylor boys, store owners, mechanics, farmers who had been in town and stayed. The mix of people you get when something drops out of the sky. They passed tools hand to hand. They used 2x4s as levers. They cut with hacksaws and then with bigger saws once someone said the gas was off. They lifted one thing, braced, and lifted the next. All night. "Hospital," someone said to me. "You're shocky." I said I could help. My words slurred. My hands didn't want to grip. I tried to stand and my right leg buckled. I sat back down, mad and then not. They put me in the back of a paneled truck with 3 others and took us not to a hospital but to a triage at a church hall. I don't remember the ride beyond flashes. The driver ran every dark light. The streets were full of people. The walls of buildings that stood were missing windows. The glass on the road made a sound under tires like heavy sand. At the church, women had already set up tables with pitchers of water and stacks of towels. A nurse in a white cap moved faster than anyone else, put her hand on a forehead, looked at a wound, decided, moved on. They took off my boot. The sock stuck to the cut on my heel. The nurse went for a basin and poured warm water over it until the cotton let go. She pressed a gauze pad and taped it. She looked at my ribs again and said, "You'll hate me." She wrapped my torso tight with a wide bandage. I saw stars when she pulled it snug. The tightness was better once it settled. My breath couldn't go deep. That kept the cough down. That was the point. She wrote my name on a tag and pinned it to the blanket and to my shirt, both. Redundant was good when order ran thin. They brought Ruth by on a rolling cot. Her left hand had stopped shaking. It was splintered. Her wrist was broken clean. She looked at me and started to cry then. Not a keening, just tears leaking without sound. She squeezed my right hand with her good one and said, "Frank." I shook my head once. I didn't know for sure, but the answer felt the same either way. She closed her eyes and nodded like she had already known. We stayed there until midnight. The lights burned off a generator that surged and dimmed. When it dimmed, voices got louder without people meaning to raise them, like we thought volume could fill the dark space. Between surges, the room went sepia. A doctor walked in with blood drying on his sleeves and asked for more sutures. A boy, not more than 10, held his little sister's hand and told her a story with a beginning and middle and no end. In the far corner, 3 men lay under coats, lined up neat. Someone had closed their eyes. About 1 in the morning, they moved me to a small school bus and took me to Providence Hospital. The drive up Franklin was slow because of debris. It took 20 minutes to go 8 blocks. In the bus, a woman told me about her husband who worked at the bank. She had his hat in her lap and kept patting it as if it were a living thing. She said his name 10 times. Saying a name holds it in place when the body is unaccounted for. At the hospital, they put us in a hallway because rooms were full. Nurses stepped around us with trays and syringes. The floor smelled like disinfectant fighting everything else. I lay on my side and watched shoes. White shoes, brown boots. A woman's scuffed black heels with a scratch at the toe. The shoes filed into my head as evidence that the building I was in stood and had floors and gravity was as I knew it. A priest came through and stopped at each person who motioned him over. Not everyone did. He said a prayer over 3. He said something softer to a man asleep. He looked tired when he reached me. He said, "You from downtown?" I said yes. He said, "Me too." He smiled and it looked like work, but good work. He moved on. I slept in slices. Loud waking, then black. Woke to a siren close, then away. Woke to a woman in the next bed asking for her mother. Woke to a nurse taking my pulse in my sleep without waking me, and still I woke at her touch. The bandage around my chest kept me from taking a deep breath. It felt like a fence. I was grateful for it. They let me stand around 7. They made me do it slow, like a new lesson. My leg took weight. Pain ran up to the hip and settled. The nurse said, "You can go when someone signs for you." I had no one to sign. My kin were in Marlin. I said I could sign for myself. She looked at my tag, at me, at the room full of bodies. She set the clipboard on my lap and turned her head as if she hadn't watched. I walked to the lobby with my hand flat on the wall. A volunteer at a folding table had lists of the living and lists of the dead and lists of the unaccounted. He moved pins across a board like a battle map. He asked my name, found it on a list, put a check beside it. He asked if I had people I was missing. I said names: Frank Dillard, Earl Carpenter, Mrs. Carter, a customer. Ruth Turner was safe. He wrote the names under a column that read, "Status unknown." Outside, Franklin Avenue had mud in the gutters and branches on the sidewalks. The sky had cleaned to a pale blue with high streaks of cirrus. Weather after a tornado is often kind. It felt like an insult and a relief. I took a bus as close as I could to downtown. The driver told us it would not go past a point. Barricades. The power poles leaned at angles. Some had fallen across the street and crews were cutting them with long saws. I walked the last 5 blocks. My boots filled with grit. The dust in my mouth tasted like yesterday. The first view of Austin Avenue stopped me. The street where I had walked every day for years was not there in the way it had been. Buildings were missing or half height. The Paget building, which had a print shop, had its front peeled. The R.T. Dennis block was a pile, flat in the middle with corners up like book covers. The Alico rose clean and intact in shape, with every window punched in. It had become a wall against which your eye could rest. People moved in clusters. They did not wander. They went to a place, did a thing, went to the next. The National Guard had a line at 5th Street. A captain with a clip-on tie stopped me. "Workers only," he said. I said I had been in the building. He looked at my bandage, at my face, at the way I stood with a slight lean. He lifted the rope and let me in without asking for a card. I went to where the office had been. The desk that had covered us was crushed flat under the weight of something I could not identify. The wall clock lay in rubble with its face cracked and its hands near 4:36. People like to make symbols out of that. Clocks tend to stop when power dies. It still made my chest tighten. A chalkboard leaned against a lamp post. Names written on it in 3 columns. Found alive, sent to hospital, deceased. A woman wrote another name as I watched. Her hand shook. She printed careful. A man asked her, "Where are you putting George?" She said, "I am not. I'm putting his hat." Her voice did not wobble. I found Earl sitting on a curb with a bandage around his head and dried blood on his collar. He grinned like none of us knew what to do with our faces, and smiled was the default. He stood slow and we hugged, and both of us made noises that had nothing to do with words. "Frank?" I asked. He looked at the ground and shook his head. He pointed to the place on the floor he had last seen him. That was under 10 feet of downtown. We moved bricks. That was the job. We lifted a broken chair and set it aside. We carried out a mirror frame with the glass gone. We picked up papers that mattered and papers that didn't. We found a photograph of a baby from some desk and set it on the stoop, where someone had arranged a little line of salvaged pictures. We passed a safe door leaning on its hinges and a radio that turned on when someone found a live outlet in the Alico, and then sparked and died. Every item was evidence of a life in motion. Crews pulled bodies. They did it with care. They set the dead under sheets and labeled them with tags tied to ankles. The armory served as a morgue. Trucks came, men lifted stretchers, drove away slow. The pace was steady. There was no rush left. Everything urgent had already happened. By noon, the sun in the open gaps made heat with no shade. Someone set up a tent and a table with sandwiches and coffee that tasted like tar and was perfect. The Red Cross handed out blankets and put up a line for tetanus shots. I took one. The needle hurt less than expected. The doctor slapped my arm and said, "Again in 10 years. He meant, if you get the chance. Baylor students carried buckets of water and filled them from a tanker. They handed out cups and poured with 2 hands so as not to spill. A boy I recognized from the soda counter at Katz's came by with a tray of bottles of Coke covered in grit. He wiped each mouth with a rag before he passed it. These details stick because they were the good machine working next to the broken machine. In the late afternoon, a man from the Weather Bureau out of Fort Worth walked the debris with a clipboard. He asked anyone who would answer what they saw. He looked at the direction of splinters, the way the grass laid in strips in places where there was still grass. He spoke of a path 1/2 mile wide at places. He noted how cars had been moved. He did not use the F word because that came later with a scale. He called it violent. The weatherman wore a white shirt and thin tie. He measured debris angles with a protractor. He took photographs with a camera that had a big flash. He wrote in a notebook with ruled pages. He asked me about the pressure change, the color of the sky, the sequence of wind and hail. I told him about the quiet before it hit. He wrote that down twice, underlined it. "That's important," he said. "The stillness. We're learning that's a sign." A crew from the telephone company strung new lines between poles that still stood. They worked with hand tools and climbers' spikes. The new wire was bright copper against the gray sky. A man on a ladder called down to his partner about connections. They spoke in numbers and colors, code for putting the world back in order. After the crews quit for the night, I walked the long way back to the church hall. A thin dust hung low over Austin for a block and then thinned. The sun set through it like a red coin. People came out of buildings that still had doors and stood in the street to talk. They spoke names and places and said, "I haven't found him," and said, "Try the hospital," and said, "Check the armory." You could map the city by those sentences. The next day was for lists. We checked the chalkboard and added names. We went to the armory and looked at tags. The guard at the door told us to prepare for what was inside. His voice was soft. It didn't help. The room was cold because they needed it to be. Cots in rows, sheets pulled. A man with a ledger asked us for names and led us if he thought he had a match. We walked, we looked, we said no or we said yes. You said a name when you said yes, and then you wrote it. Writing made it true in a way nothing else does. I found Frank on the second pass. A piece of plaster had flattened his hat in a way that made it easy to know him. His face was calm in a way that made you think of sleep before you erased the thought as unkind to the real. I put my hand on the sheet and said his full name, and then I wrote it with a pen that skipped on the paper. The clerk asked me for next of kin. I said his wife and gave an address. The clerk wrote. He had the strong hand of a man who uses a pencil all day. We did that for 3 hours. We checked the injured lists at Providence and Hillcrest. We walked to the Alico and pinned notes on a board for people we could not find. Calls went out when the phone accidentally worked. Lines to Houston and Dallas were the most reliable. Newsmen wrote in notebooks and asked for what we saw. They stood where the famous photograph would be taken and wrote down any sentence. I gave them none that day. Officials announced numbers at the makeshift press point. Dead count 90, then 100, then 100. 10, then settled at 114 with caveats. Injured near 600. Property damage numbers that meant nothing to anyone who had just lost their photo album or their arm. They spoke of insurance and federal aid. The governor would come. The president sent words. All of it floated above us like sound on the second floor. We found Earl's neighbor under a beam and lifted it. He had been dead since Monday. We moved him with care to the line of stretchers. Someone had chalk. He drew a number on the beam where we had taken a man from under it. Not out of coldness, out of the need to make it go in a book. At noon, the sun made the metal smell come up again. Fuel, oil, hot wires cooling, wet paper drying, old wood damp at the center. We ate ham on white bread, 2 slices, mustard, handed across a table by a woman whose hands shook only when she stopped to rest, never when she handed. Someone said a word about a mass service on Sunday. Not a funeral, a service to stand together and put the same sounds in the air at the same time. That afternoon, a group of men and women came with clipboards, insurance adjusters. They climbed over what counted as someone's property and made notes because someone had to. They wore hats and took off their jackets and rolled up sleeves. They gave out forms to people whose address was now a gap. We resented them for a minute, and then we understood they were part of the machine of repair. The armory filled. The hospitals emptied some. People went home to houses without roofs and slept in rooms that had had walls. Others slept in relatives' houses or in church basements on basketball courts like I did. The Red Cross posted notices. Food lines formed at certain hours. We got in them like on any day you must eat before you can think. A boy handed me a bowl of beans and said, "Careful, hot." He was 10. He said it like he was 80. By Thursday, funerals began. You could not attend them all. You picked one because you knew the person, and because the burial was at a specific time, and because the funeral home had room. We stood under a sky that had turned gentle and listened to names. We heard the dirt on the lid because the ground was wet and the sound carried. I went to Frank's service at First Baptist. His wife sat in the front pew with her hands folded. She wore a black dress and a hat with a small veil. The preacher spoke about Frank's steady nature, his fairness with customers, his quiet faith. He did not dwell on how Frank died. He spoke of how Frank lived. After the service, I told his wife that Frank had tried to move people to safety. She nodded and pressed my hand. "That was Frank," she said. I went back to the store site each morning, worked until my ribs said stop, and then did it again. We salvaged ledgers, the petty cash tin, a customer list damp and smudged. We put the list in the sun and then moved it to shade because the paper curled too fast and would split. I ran my finger down a column and saw names and addresses and pictured each front door. I checked a small box when I knew a person was safe. I put a dot when I did not. That tiny mark was a weight. On Friday, they set up a table under a tree with a sign, "Counseling." I had not heard the word used that way. A woman sat there who looked like a school teacher. People went and sat, and sometimes they talked. Sometimes they looked at the ground, and the woman looked with them, and that counted as work done. Decades went by, and the 8 minutes stayed inside the day. I changed jobs because there was no store to go back to for a long time. I went to work for a furniture shop on Bosque when they reopened in a new building with deep footings and anchors to the roof. Codes changed. The city made maps of danger. The Weather Bureau, after Waco and Worcester, changed how it warned. Tornado watches and warnings became words you heard on the radio with meaning. Sirens went up. I learned the difference between a watch and a warning in a way that made my chest tight each spring. I married and had a son. He grew up with a father who walked outside at the first rumble of thunder and stared at the sky for a sign. He learned to go to the hallway and to take a mattress and to cover his head without me saying it 3 times. He learned that I could not sleep if the forecast said severe. He forgave me that. Every May on the 11th, I went downtown. They put a plaque near the spot. It lists 114 names. I run my fingers over the letters every year. Frank's name is there. So is a boy's name I didn't know then who died in a car on Austin. So is a woman's name from the drugstore who had taken cover under the counter. The plaque is square and plain. Brass gone dull in spots from rain and hands. The Alico building is still the line that makes sense on the skyline. When I stand beneath it and look up, my neck feels the tilt from that day. The windows shine new. The stone at the base bears scuffs that are older than me. People take photographs. They ask me sometimes if I remember. I say yes. I say it like a date. May 11th, 1953. I say 4:36. I say 8 minutes. I keep a box in a closet. It has the ledger page with names dried in a blur from water and weather. It has my name tag from the church hall with 2 pinholes and Waco written in pencil. It has the safety pin a nurse used on the bandage around my chest. It has a newspaper from 2 days after, the headline big and grim. I take the box down each spring and look through it the way you look through photographs of someone you loved who left. Not to hurt, to keep edges clear. When new people in town ask why we talk about it still, I tell them the facts. 114 dead, 600 injured, damage beyond numbers. I tell them about the smell in the air afterward and the sound of the city when machines stopped and only voices moved. I tell them about the men at work over the hole where I lay. On me. Lift. Hold. Wedge. I tell them about a teenager who spilled water and said sorry to everyone, and then came back with more. I do not say the word miracle. I do not say meant to be. I talk about wood and weight and timing and where I was in a building at a particular second. I talk about how a desk made of oak and iron held just enough. I talk about how a man set a jack and pumped it slow, and how another man cut a panel with a handsaw because the smell of gas said no sparks. I talk about a city that knew how to show up without being told. Storms came after. Big ones. Smaller ones. Watches and warnings. We got radar and prediction and, in time, phones that could tell you what your wall used to. My son showed me on a screen a little red polygon with our street inside it. I looked at it with the same quiet dread that lived under the ribs since I counted breaths under a desk. The color and the siren and the date changed. The feeling stayed. My wife learned to read the signs in me. When the forecast called for severe weather, she would set a flashlight by the bed and fill the bathtub with water. She never asked why I checked the locks twice or kept a battery radio in the kitchen cabinet. She understood that some things from before her time had shaped the man she married. Ruth wrote me a letter in 1963. She had moved to Temple and married. Her left wrist still ached when it rained. We exchanged Christmas cards for years. Then distance did what distance does. Earl worked construction until his back gave out. He died in 1982 while mowing his lawn. At his funeral, I sat in the back and thought about how he had wrapped a strap around mattresses as if he could keep them from flying. In 1978, they dedicated the memorial plaque. The mayor spoke about resilience. A minister said a prayer. I stood with other survivors and listened to the names read aloud. When they finished, people placed flowers at the base. I placed a small wooden truck, like the one the boy had been playing with that day. A reporter interviewed me in 1993 for the 40th anniversary. She asked what I wanted people to remember. I said to remember the names. I said to remember that when the worst thing happened, the best thing happened too. People came running toward the danger. They lifted what could be lifted. They saved who could be saved. I say this last part for a camera, for a microphone, for a room where someone has asked. It is the same each time because the truth does not need new phrases. May 11, 1953. Waco, Texas. 114 dead. Nearly 600 injured. 8 minutes through downtown. I was under a desk in RT Dennis with Ruth Turner. A beam pinned my leg. A man tapped 3 times and I tapped back. They lifted wood with jacks and hands. They pulled us out. I stepped into a street that had become another place. Frank died doing something he would have done on any day, moving people towards safety. He is the face I see when I pass the plaque. I say his name out loud, same spot every year. Earl lived. He kept a scar over his right eyebrow and a better laugh after. Ruth married and moved to Temple. We exchanged Christmas cards for a decade. Then we wrote less. People go their ways. That is not a tragedy. It is the end of a chapter. The city put up new glass. The sidewalks fill with shoppers and students. Cars move where cars were stacked. If you stand at 5th and Austin and squint, you can see what was and what is at the same time. The street knows both. The Alico watches. A tower that stands through a week where much did not. I still count to 10 when the wind hits hard and the pressure in my ears changes. I still look for a desk or a bathtub or a ditch. I still think of gas when I smell anything sharp in a closed room. I still carry a flashlight in the glove box. It works because I turn it on once a month and tap the batteries like a habit. Habits are the scaffolding you build after. They are not superstition. They are the parts of control you can own. If you live through a thing like this, people tell you about fate. I tell them the names of the men who rode the blocks under the beam. I tell them the nurse who wrapped my ribs tight. I tell them the boy who wiped the bottle lips and the minister who put his hand on shoulders and said nothing fancy. I tell them the count goes to 114, and then no farther. And each number is a person whose chair is empty at a table in a specific kitchen. That is the measure. 8 minutes is long. Count it with a clock. It is long enough for a building to come down and for a man to decide to go to the back wall and for a desk to hold. It is long enough for a city to get a scar that never leaves. I carry mine under my shirt and in the way my right leg leads when I'm tired, and in a line of breath I do not cross when thunder rolls. This is my account. First person. Time and place. I give it to anyone who asks, because memory as witness holds weight. The storm took the center of our town and did not take the core of what we did after. We counted the lost. We pulled out the living. We wrote the names. We built again with anchors into concrete and with sirens that talk. We teach our children which room to go to when the sky says go. After the first year, the city held a moment of silence at 4:36. Some years a bell rang at a church. Some years it was just people stopping in place. I stood where the store had been and watched traffic pause. A few drivers did not know why we had gone still. They waited anyway. That is how community works when memory gets handed down. The young people who ask me now were not born when it happened. They have phones that show them the weather in colors. They have warnings that come with sounds and pictures. They have basements built for storms and buildings made to bend. They have things we did not have, but they still need to know that 8 minutes can change everything and that what you do in the 8 minutes after matters more than the 8 minutes during. I'm old now. My voice carries less than it used to. My hands shake when I write. But I remember the weight of the desk and the sound of the jack and the feel of Ruth's hand next to mine in the dark. I remember the taste of dust and the smell of gas and the way the light looked when it came through the triangle gap. These are not memories that fade. They are carved. When I die, someone else will have to tell this story. They will read it from papers or hear it from recordings. It will become history instead of memory. That is how time works. But the names on the plaque will still be there. The aliko will still stand. The street will still know what happened on it. I spoke to school groups when they asked. I brought the tag from the church hall and the safety pin. I described the smell of wet plaster and gas and the sound of nails pulling free. I kept my sentences short. I told them where to go in a house. I told them to keep shoes by the bed. I did not try to make it dramatic. They did not need drama. They needed steps they could do. The memory of the tornado is not a ghost that haunts the city. It is a foundation. It taught us that even the strongest structures can fall, but the spirit of a community can hold. It taught us to be prepared, to listen to the warnings, to help our neighbors. When everything else is stripped away, what remains is each other.